Hi, everyone. This is Rich, and today I want to discuss an accounting crisis that's facing real estate investors across the country. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe. It'll really help the channel reach more people. And if you are a real estate investor looking for professional tax and accounting help, please schedule a call using the link below. If you're a real estate investor, there's no question you've been hit with tons of solicitations by bookkeepers claiming to be experts in this space. And an interesting thing happened. As I was watching some YouTube videos on bookkeeping practices, just trying to see what the competition is doing, I came across a channel which really got me thinking about this topic. I came across a channel with this individual who calls himself a bookkeeping expert, and he claims to be an expert in real estate investor bookkeeping. During the video, he was asked a question by a viewer who I guess is a bookkeeper, asking how to record a transaction for a client who was being foreclosed on. So a real estate investor was having a property that was foreclosed on. And his answer, without blinking, was, I don't know. And to me, to call yourself an expert and to so quickly say, I don't know, not be able to give an answer, not be able to think through it, was quite alarming. And really was three takeaways. One, that he didn't know, which kind of hurts the fact that you're calling yourself an expert. Second, that one of his students or followers, who's probably also a bookkeeper, didn't know. He offers a bookkeeping course, so can we imagine the quality of that? And third is that he had no ability to think through the issue. I mean, not knowing the specifics, because these type of journal entries can get quite complex. But just at a very basic level, you should have been able to reason that if somebody's being foreclosed on, I have this property that's an asset on my balance sheet that needs to come off since I'll no longer own it. I have a mortgage on the property, so there's a liability that will need to come off the balance sheet as well since I'll no longer owe it. And that difference, plus or minus, would be a gain or a loss on that foreclosure. And the inability to think through that really got me thinking, what else are these individuals saying? So I started to watch more of his videos and some other videos. Another comment somebody asked is, how do you record a depreciation expense? Again, a very basic thing. I was very surprised that a bookkeeper would need to ask that. And his answer was, I don't do that. The tax accountant does that. And that got me thinking, you have a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between financial or book depreciation and tax depreciation. Financial depreciation is typically going to be straight line, where tax will be some sort of accelerated method. And I started watching more videos, and the more I watched, the more I realized that the word expert is thrown out there a lot, and it really is becoming meaningless. And I put together a couple slides, which I think will really illustrate why people are calling themselves experts, how you as a business owner can determine who's really an expert, and if you are a bookkeeper who would like to specialize in an industry, what you really need to do to call yourself an expert. So I brought up a slide here on the expert crisis in bookkeeping. And backing up a little bit, social media marketers, for some reason, have latched on to the accounting profession and have sold this idea that you can become a bookkeeper with no experience, making a six-figure income, working a couple hours a day. And it couldn't be further from the truth. What they're doing is they're selling a dream to people who want to change in career, and they make them believe that they could do this by buying their training course. And myself, as an accountant who has a bachelor's degree in accounting, an MBA, I'm a CPA, and I have over 25 years of experience, I can tell you, you cannot be an expert taking one of these online courses or doing this for a year, 2 years, or 3 years. It takes a long time. And the reason people buy into this is an interesting concept called the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you guys have ever heard of this, it's quite interesting. And we're going to talk about it. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is this phenomenon found where people who know nothing about a subject, once they learn a little bit, they start to overestimate their abilities and they start to think they're an expert. And that's what's happening. You have somebody who has no understanding of accounting or finance, who learns a little bit, and then they think they're an expert. Then they're led to believe that they need to niche to make more money. And by handling one or two clients or looking up an article or two, they're then an expert in an industry. And when you have that small amount, you look at this chart, as you know nothing, you have very high confidence, putting you at the peak of Mount Stupid, like this bookkeeping expert. The problem is when you put yourself out as an expert and people actually buy this and they hire you, you're quickly going to realize you don't know what you're doing, right? That's this valley of despair. So now you've got these clients and you have absolutely no ability to serve them. and the panic sets in, right? That causes you to hopefully learn what you're doing. That takes time. That causes stress. You're going to lose some clients in the meantime. So hopefully, as you are learning, you encounter this slope of enlightenment, and then ultimately you get to this point where you're an expert. And somebody who's an expert knows one thing more than anything else, is that they don't know everything, but they also know almost always how to find the right answer. So you have this situation where you're bringing people into this industry who now know a little bit and think they're experts. Other problems with this industry is a low barrier to entry. There's virtually no barrier to entry. Your QuickBooks Pro account is free. You can get training online and these videos usually for free, or pay a couple hundred, maybe a couple $1,000 for a training course. And you think you're equipped to properly handle clients. Then they've promoted this idea of niching down, right? Then there's this catchphrase I like to use, that the riches are in the niches, that you could charge 20, 30, 40, 50% more because you're an expert in an industry. And while that's true, you need to actually be an expert. So this niching became prevalent. Everybody started chasing dollars. And to be perfectly honest, they started faking experience or remembering a couple catchphrases and regurgitating them. And this is very easy to spot. So when talking to a bookkeeper, whether it's a current one you have or one you're interviewing, you're going to quickly understand that they don't understand US GAAP, they don't understand ASC's, accounting standard codifications, and they definitely don't understand industry regulations, right? It's difficult to understand industry regulations if you haven't worked in that industry. And most bookkeepers have never worked in industry. So I've worked in actual industries and I've gained expertise in those industries, specifically real estate, but I've also worked in utilities and in gaming. So I have this industry experience that goes with my book knowledge, right? And that's something that's often lacking with bookkeepers who took an online course, got lucky enough to find a couple clients, and then don't know what they're doing. Sadly, most business owners can't tell the difference. They're busy. They don't understand accounting or finance themselves. The interview with a bookkeeper went well, and they're entrusting their finances to them. And this is really a sad thing, because as a bookkeeper, you have an obligation to serve your clients well, and to take their money for work you can't do is really not a professional way to act. Right? You need to serve your clients. You need to tell them when you're not competent. What's the result? So the result are you're going to have bad books, tax problems, and it's going to cost a lot of money for cleanups. It's going to cost a lot of money for tax resolution. In my other practice, Bloom CPA, I have probably every 2 to 3 months, I add a new client who comes to me from a bookkeeper who left their books as a disaster or caused tax problems. So there's not a single quarter that goes by where a couple people call me and say, my books are a mess. My old bookkeeper didn't know what they're doing. I think I've overpaid on taxes. I received this letter from the IRS. Doesn't sound right. These things happen all the time. And they're caused by inexperienced bookkeepers. And this isn't to beat up on people without experience, right? Everybody has to start from a base of 0 and work their way up. The issue is when you put yourself out as an expert and you're not, right? Get your experience, work for somebody else, learn what you're doing. When you're working with a client, you need to be their expert. You need to know what you're doing. And the place for beginners to start is doing general service type businesses that don't have any special regulations, that don't have any advanced accounting needs. You need to be in very simple businesses as you build up that knowledge base. And then how to identify a real industry expert is going to be having the kind of conversations that I'm having with you. We're going to talk about a bunch of things. If you start hearing these things and the client or the bookkeeper starts talking about these type of things, you're going to know very quickly whether or not they're an expert or it's superficial. So one thing I want to do to illustrate this, I'm going to use some props today, is I have here an accounting textbook, right? This is a general accounting textbook. Within this textbook, if you learn this, you can serve any client that has a very simple business, right? Any service business, any small, non-technical industry, right? In this book, which is pretty thick, there's not even a single chapter on real estate accounting. And this book would be 10 times more than any bookkeeper who learned online would know, right? And you've got nothing out of here that's real estate. The next step is you go to something like your GAAP book. Okay, here's US GAAP. And what's interesting is if you go to the back of this book, you have a chapter here It's only a couple pages. This is it. This is the total thickness of GAAP ASCs on real estate, right? It's 7-8 pages. Other topics that have to do with real estate would be leases, right? Here's a chapter on leases. Very small, right? You'll know more than most, but this by no means makes you an expert. The next step would be these guides, these practitioner guides, right? These are small books, right? Just less than an inch, which go over some of the more common topics a real estate accountant would face. These are great first starts to see if you're interested in the industry, to know more than most, but again, by no means be an expert. Next, you could graduate to a practitioner's guide, okay? So this is a pretty thick book. This is 100% real estate. Okay, it goes to all the most common transactions. And what I want to highlight here is this interesting fact that you have this entire chapter here on leases, okay? And it's about 100 pages, which is pretty good. So within 100 pages of this book, right, about this much of it, you're going to learn the basics of leasing. And the question is going to be, how can I not be an expert after reading 100 pages? Well, you're going to go to your next resource. This book, if you can believe it, this massive book is just on lease accounting. That's it. So in order to be a bookkeeper working for general businesses, you need to know a little bit about a lot of different things. That knowledge is pretty easy to get. If you're going to be an expert and niche down, the further down you niche, the more you have to know. Okay? It's completely inverse of what you're thinking. So as I went through my real estate career, starting in general accounting for real estate, then getting into transactions, and then ending my corporate career in real estate and leases, this is a guide I would use almost every day. And this is just for lease accounting, which is just a small piece of real estate accounting. Right? The same thing could happen in any segment of the real estate industry. You can get books that expand on the topics exponentially. Okay, so if you're a real estate investor, now you're asking yourself, well, who do I hire? And it's really very simple. If you're a small real estate investor, maybe you have a single family home, maybe 1 to 3 units, maybe just a couple properties, and you operate on a cash basis, a very simple bookkeeper who's just going to process your transactions to the bank feed is fine. You're just trying to get tax returns in, and you don't need more advanced accounting. Most bookkeepers who put themselves out as real estate experts will be able to do this. They'll probably be able to split some transactions in QuickBooks to account for the purchase of a property. Maybe they'll be able to handle some basic inventory accounting if you're a flipper. But this is where you're going to want to restrict hiring them to just very simple operations. Now, if you have a portfolio, 4 more units, you're going to want somebody who at the very least can use a modified accrual system. So now we're going to use cash basis for the bank feed stuffs, and we're going to have some accruals. Short-term rentals, the same thing. Now we get into multifamilies or over 5 units, you're going to start to want to know about ASCs. And we're going to look at those in a minute because there are quite a few that affect real estate investors. The same will be for commercial, BRRRR investors, fix and flip. Now you need to know about inventory. If you're an investor seeking financing, most banks are going to want GAAP financial statements. And if you're into syndications or you're an investor with additional investors, GAAP accounting and ASC will often be required. So the more complex your organization, the more your accountant needs to know. And you need to be confident that the bookkeeper you're looking to hire knows how to do these things. So here's a highlight of some of the ASCs that your accountant who claims to be an expert needs to understand. ASC 970 was the one that I showed you in the book. That's a couple pages in GAAP. Kind of lays out the conceptual framework for accounting for real estate. But then different transactions within real estate are affected by other ASCs. Your accounts receivable, your property, plant, and equipment, debt modification, extinguishment, and mortgage. So that example of the individual not knowing how to do a journal entry for the forgiveness of debt, ASC 470 is going to give you some insight into that. Right here, you have 606, which is your revenue recognition ASC. That's going to be important for how to recognize revenue. Again, 610, derecognition of non-financial assets. Same thing. You're going to need to know those to make these more advanced journal entries. ASC 850 is an important one. If you have a client who's purchasing a property, is that property an asset or is it a business? Understanding ASC 805 is going to help you make the correct accounting determination. So all of these factor in to what you're going to need to be an expert. And, you want to be able to look at these and at least understand the concept. Let's look at one, for example, ASC 410, asset retirement obligations, environmental cleanup, and site restoration liabilities. So you could have a client come to you who's developing a piece of land and they have remediation costs. Now, you may not know how to handle remediation costs off the top of your head, but you should know that there are ASCs for that, and you go to the pronouncement. I wouldn't expect somebody, unless they're working in all the time, to know that any remediation work when you're purchasing a property can be capitalized versus if you're negligent and you have a spill on a property that gets expense to clean up, right? So conditions matter. You don't need to always know those answers, but wouldn't it be great if a client asked and you knew there was an ASC and you could say to them, well, ASC 410 gives me guidance on this. Let's get a little more information on the exact situation and then I get you an answer. You've punted, you've stalled, but you've impressed them that you know about ASC 410 and that shows mastery of the topic and that you can get the right answer. So it's important to familiarize yourself with all the different things that affect real estate accounting. Right? So these are kind of a highlight. Then there's a flow chart. So this flow chart kind of takes each ASC and it breaks it down to the type of transactions that it would affect. And then there's also this matrix, which sums it up even more. So, if the real estate transaction is an acquisition, you're going to look at 805 or 820. If it's leasing, 842, 310. So it just depends on what you're looking at. Okay. And then one other thing is, and I do this with all my more advanced entries, because if I'm training staff, if I need a reference, if I want to have a conversation with a client, it's good to go to the guidance and actually map out how these things work. So this is the type of thing you should have on all these more advanced entries. So here would be one for property foreclosure guide. So on one side, you lay out the accounting, you lay out the guidance, the rules, the journal entries. It's all pretty standard stuff. Depending on the specifics, would determine whether or not you use these. And then the same thing for the tax. Now, I wouldn't fault anybody who doesn't understand the tax. Most bookkeepers are not tax professionals. For those of you that do both, you want to lay out how the tax works. You want to make sure that all the important components are considered when evaluating how to account for something and how to prepare the taxes for something. So I hope this helped get a reference point going forward. So to all real estate investors, it's critical that you get a professional that knows what they're doing and that you ask the right questions. Even a small real estate investor likely has many millions of dollars invested. You can't risk that type of investment to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And if you're an inexperienced bookkeeper, again, I'm not trying to beat you up. I'm trying to actually motivate you to truly be an expert. You need to work toward understanding these things so you can properly serve your client. This took me many years to master. I mastered it through formal education, through supplemental reading, through on-the-job training. It's nothing that could be learned from an online course taught by somebody who was taught from an online course or was self-taught. Those things are great. Put in all the effort, prove your skills, but stay away from clients who need experts if you're not. You're not serving them well, and you're damaging your reputation. With that, I want to thank everybody for watching. Again, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're a real estate investor in need of some help, please schedule a call. And if you're an accountant who would like to discuss more and actually learn how to get some real training, please use the link below as well. And I'll see you guys in the next video.